That is everybody. Okay. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'd like to begin by thanking Ilya, Amir, and Daniel for their hospitality, Shelley and Julia for arranging this incredible group of people here, Ryan for building this lovely podium. Where's Ryan? Yeah, there you are. Okay. And especially teaching every one of you for coming. This is really, really humbling to see you all here. Swirling Star has grown to become one of the most active and successful O.T.O lodges in the world during the last 14 years. It enjoys a proud tradition that could be said to date back to the mid-1980s, when Bill Paget founded Euless Encampment, later Euless Lodge, in Atlanta, Georgia. As Nancy points out, Bill started the O.T.O in the Southeast. He was a key early member of TAHUTI Lodge in New York. We conceived of ourselves as a lodge of lodge masters. We helped to develop several bodies throughout the U.S. primarily, and in fact throughout the world, that continue to exist today in newer forms. John Plymell of Jacksonville was another early influence in Swirling Star. John took his 5th degree at TAHUTI. He then courageously picked up the mantle of leadership that had been tossed aside by one of the forgotten many who failed at their task. Nancy and I pleaded with John to take over. Despite his misgivings, he agreed to serve. On a personal note, I will never forget his kindness when Nancy and I came to Jacksonville in 1992 to open the 4th degree in Florida. John, like Bill Paget, was betrayed by ambitious pretenders who ultimately fell by the wayside in that Hogwarts-like sorting hat process that is O.T.O membership. I salute them both as friends. Nancy and I did the first Mass in South Florida. Ilya, Emmy, and Amir will well remember Jim Garvey, who came down from TAHUTI to deacon for that Mass. I recall the sense that I was banging a magical sledgehammer against a protective energy wall that had been established by the numerous voodoo and Caribbean traditions in this area. I was asserting O.T.O's right to be part of that circle of power. As the Mass drew to its close, the wall opened and a blaze of light shone through, and I knew that Swirling Star had been established on a firm footing here. One of the things that has been so rare and precious about Swirling Star is the amount of energy that you guys have put into building and supporting other bodies in the state of Florida. Ilya's efforts in initiating all of you guys teaching, performing masses have been exemplary. The unity of this region, with few exceptions, is unique. Aleister Crowley's extraordinary knowledge of the spiritual practices of the world allowed him to distill their essence into a rational, scientifically based system whose brilliance is absolutely unrivaled in the annals of religious history. The Book of the Law stands in a class by itself. And I know we can all appreciate the fact that Crowley created a religion whose sacraments may be considered sex and drugs and rock and roll. Talk about great marketing. In the Center of the Fire chronicles my introduction and youthful journey through the labyrinth of Thelema and provides an intimate look at the very early years of the modern OTO. We are at a point in the development of Thelema when it becomes critical to build a historical record that we can pass down to later generations of OTO members. We must offer them a sense of continuity, a sense that they are part of a greater whole, walking a path tread by others whose efforts have, one hopes, lightened the girders of the soul of those who follow. Perhaps they will not need to make the same mistakes we have made. Perhaps they will be enabled to explore new territory we were unable to reach. Perhaps by standing on our shoulders, they will be able to see over greater vistas, as we have stood on the shoulders of Crowley, Carl Germer, and Grady McMurtry. In ancient times, people shared the history of their tribe while sitting around campfires. The older people would recount the myths and legends their elders had passed down to them, then add their personal experiences. Thus, the knowledge base of the tribe grew, generation by generation. In the center of the fire is about as close as we can come to sitting around a modern campfire listening to a tribal elder share his memories of our mutual past and recounting the stories his elders told him. I was thrust into the historical development of the OTO in a unique period and place. I worked at Samuel Weiser's Bookstore in New York from 1973 to 1977. This was the heyday of the modern occult renaissance, and in particular, the most fertile years of Crowley publishing. Weiser was the hotbed of the occult universe, and New York City, the crossroads of the world. Much of what we take for granted today developed then. By way of example, in 1976, I was responsible for creating the first popular edition of the Book of the Law that included the handwritten manuscript in the back. That had not been done before. It had been done by Crowley, but in a very rare and expensive edition, certainly not a popular edition. In 1977, I undertook the republication, the second edition of the Thoth Tarot deck that replaced the muddy and pathetic images of the first edition of the deck. And I was responsible for the commentaries of L, Marcello Moda's introduction to the modern occult scene in 1975. My primary motivation for writing In the Center of the Fire was to share the story of my relationship with Marcello Moda, Grady McMurtry, the discovery of the Germer Library, and the temporary breach between AA and OTO. Thelemites manned the very ramparts of heaven to pursue and defend their understanding of the truth of the law of liberty and their personal roles in its promulgation and establishment. What was at stake was the leadership of the Thelemic movement. If you wrote to OTO, who answered the letter? If you reached out to AA, who took the call? If you bought a book that claimed to have been written by Crowley, how did you know that it was? And if it was an edited collection or a previously unpublished book, who decided it should be done? These were issues that had certainly never needed to be questioned during Crowley's lifetime, And when Karl Germer took over as his successor in 1947, his publications all bore the mark of authenticity. Everyone knew that it was Crowley's successor. Germer died in 1962. Then what happened? Very little, actually. What followed was the period I call the interregnum, beginning at Germer's death in 1962 and ending in 1969, when Grady McMurtry stepped up to the plate and assumed the leadership responsibility that Crowley had given him. These 7 years were times of confusion and chaos. No central leader or spokesman emerged. The pseudonymous Frater Shiva has written a history of this period called Inside Solar Lodge, Outside the Law. I don't know if any of you read it, but it makes quite clear what can happen when the lunatics are allowed to run the asylum. When Grady seized the reins of O.T.O leadership, the order was in its dying gasps. There were no resources. There were fewer than a dozen people, surviving members of Agape Lodge, and no one had any idea of where to go next. But Grady managed to get the TAHUTI published in 1969, and it bore a card called the Caliph card, which had his signature and his contact address, and that proved to be the building block for the resuscitation of the order. Marcelo Motta was a Brazilian disciple of Karl Germer's. He had attended college in the United States during the 1950s and traveled to meet Germer and met a number of O.T.O people in California during the 50s. As Grady's concern was O.T.O, Marcelo's concern was AA. Marcelo helped Germer with the production of Liber Aleph in 1962, just before Germer died. He was thus acutely aware of the importance of copyright and intellectual property. In 1974, 5 years after Grady assumed leadership of O.T.O, Marcelo submitted his manuscript, The Commentaries of L, to Weiser's. I became his editor. He was obsessed with the idea of competent people managing the dissemination of Crowley's message. This was despite his later eccentricities to come. Motta also made the claim of being praemonstrator of AA. I have never had any reason to doubt either Grady's authority in O.T.O or Motta's authority in AA. Hymenaeus Beta recently pointed out the irony of the fact that despite their intimacy, Crowley never trained Grady in AA. Similarly, despite the fact that Motta was his chief disciple, Germer never trained Motta in O.T.O. In the spring of 1976, Motta received 2 letters from Phyllis Seckler. He was in Brazil. Phyllis Seckler was a longtime member of O.T.O who had met him during his trip to California in the 1950s. She informed him of the death of Sasha Germer, Karl Germer's widow. This raised the question of the disposition of the Thelemic library. You know, when Crowley died, all of his papers and books, many of his papers and books, came to the United States and were given to Carl Germer. And, you know, with him and his widow dead, now what was going to happen? What was going to happen was a mess. Calaveras County in California, Northern California near Sacramento, was about to seize the Germer estate, including the Crowley Library, for unpaid property taxes. As Moda, Grady, Phyllis, and Helen Parsons Smith tried to sort through their various positions on the library, they reached a deadlock. I was intimately involved with all of this, and my book explains in detail what happened. There are two major themes that I feel compelled to address in this series of talks. This is my sixth one, and hopefully with the video the last, on this book. The first area is the idea of AA lineages. The second is the issue of O.T.O copyrights. To begin with lineages. In July of 1976, Moda and Grady declared magical war on each other. The head of O.T.O and the praemonstrator of AA each said no for the first time in our history. Crowley had worn the unified crown of both orders until his death in 1947. He passed that on to Carl Germer. If we date the Thelemic O.T.O to 1912, when Crowley joined and formed the English O.T.O, English-speaking O.T.O, the alliance between O.T.O and AA was a matter of course for half a century. And as far as we know, the question of division or conflict between AA and O.T.O never once arose between 1962 and 1976. There were no such things as AA lineages. During their negotiations in July of 1976, Grady accepted Moda's assertion of headship of AA. If Moda was stating it, Grady assumed it must have been true. Who else would dare make such a statement? Grady certainly never said anything like, well, howdy, Marcello, I'm Grady McMurtry from the Jane Wolfe lineage, and I'm happy you're saying hello from over there in the Carl Germer line. The entire modern concept of AA lineages came about after the showdown between these two leaders in 1976. And I know this because I was right in the middle. Grady was absolutely clear about the relationship between O.T.O and AA. He wrote in a July 21st, 1976 letter to Moda that AA is the flaming heart of O.T.O. On the other hand, Grady was very careful never to claim AA leadership, while fiercely defending his legitimate authority as head of the O.T.O. Moda never expressed any interest in the O.T.O. He repeatedly said that he had no interest in the O.T.O. until he learned that Crowley had willed the copyrights to O.T.O. People today, listening to claims of a McMurtry lineage of AA or a Phyllis Seckler lineage of AA, simply have no idea how totally off the wall such claims are when viewed against both the spiritual reality of AA and the tradition of O.T.O. I believe there is one AA with one set of officers, one praemonstrator, one imperator, and one cancellarius, just as there is one O.T.O with one outer head, one treasurer, and one secretary. We have at last been able to dispense with such inane characterizations as the Caliphate O.T.O. If you have affiliated yourselves, I hope no one in this room has, but if you have affiliated yourselves with one of the outlying groups bragging about AA lineages, you might consider correcting your mistakes sooner rather than later. There is no shame in sincerely searching for truth, learning that you have been temporarily misled by false claims, and using that as a learning opportunity to make better informed decisions. Believe me, we have all had to do it. Now I'd like to return to the copyrights for a moment. Some have complained about how much time, money, and energy has been put into the battle for copyrights. Hymenaeus Beta's leadership has been criticized for being too focused on the legalities of copyright, as if courtroom battles are not magical. I'm here to tell you that such criticisms are just plain wrong. They're very short-sighted. We devoted a quarter century to cleaning up the mess left to us by Crowley and Germer. Grady understood that he had no choice but to fight for our legal rights in the United States and succeed. And in fact, he died on the very day our copyright victory was declared in 1985. Since then, O.T.O has won copyright and trademark protection throughout the world. My initial exposure to Crowley's writings came at a time when there were no recognized copyrights. Moda was adamant about the need to establish a strong legal position. I was younger and far less concerned. I believed the free exchange of ideas was the best way for Crowley's message to get out there. There had been a virtual tsunami of publications since 1969. Why screw it up? Then I learned why. In the book, I mentioned my disappointment in 1974 when the otherwise excellent Crowley on Christ came out, and I read it and found that De Arte Magica had been popped into the appendix, which is a completely unrelated text. That meant I couldn't pass the book on to my father. My father was a really strong reader. He would have loved Crowley's sense of expression and sense of humor, but not with the Arte Magica in there. Since Weiser was distributing the title in the United States, I called Ian Miller at C.W. Daniel in England and asked him why he had put that secret O.T.O paper in the back of that particular book. He explained to me that it had been accidentally left out of the secret rituals of the O.T.O, so they just popped it into the next Crowley book they did. Swell. It is impossible to overstate the importance of this. A religious movement has no chance of achieving doctrinal coherence unless it has control of its message. Without the exclusivity of copyright, anyone can claim to be representing the order. This is what happened in the old days, chaos. And chaos is what many of us have spent our life repairing. Those are my two obligatory comments on the universal nature of Thelema. On a more personal note, I believe there are some themes from the 70s and 80s that you guys might enjoy hearing. These were very early days in the development of the order you guys inherited. We didn't even know when our new year began. Whether the Thelemic calendar turned on the spring equinox, the anniversary of the Supreme Ritual, or April 8th, the first day of the writing of the Book of the Law. While researching the book, I came across a memo I'd forgotten about that I had written to the Supreme Council in 1984 that settled the question. During one of Grady's trips to New York, he had brought a letter that Crowley had sent to him with the word of the spring equinox. Since Grady had saved the envelope with the postmark, we knew it was sent in 1944. Crowley dated the greeting Anno 40, so we knew that our new year turned at the spring equinox. One of the most critical stages in the development of the modern O.T.O was the battle over the Constitution during the 1980s. The Constitution had been by the way, I'm not speaking about current America. I've always gotten confused here for a moment. This is the O.T.O Constitution. We were ignoring it then as much as as the U.S. is ignoring our Constitution today. The O.T.O Constitution had been challenged for several years by elements of the Northern California leadership. Grady lived there, and they were a strong influence on him. We were in danger of the O.T.O morphing into an entirely alien conceptual framework from that laid out by Crowley in the Blue Equinox. We worked feverishly in New York and Southern California to prevent O.T.O from becoming something it was not designed to be. In 1983, TAHUTI started the New York Constitutional Study Group. We flew Grady in for an important meeting to strategize a way to influence the larger order in favor of the Blue Equinox design. We were sure of ourselves as channels of the will of the order. After Grady's death, one of us became Caliph. I stepped down as TAHUTI Lodge Master and assumed the role of Grand Secretary General. Thus, when the dust had settled in the fall of 1985, 2 of the 3 Grand Lodge officers were strict constitutionalists. I founded TAHUTI Lodge TAHUTI in 1979. It began as an encampment, we called it in those days. It is now the oldest O.T.O lodge in the world to have experienced orderly transitions of mastership. We have enjoyed the leadership of 7 people in 33 years. Through it all, TAHUTI has maintained a regular schedule of Gnostic masses, initiations, classes, lectures, independent rituals, and publications. But in my day, there was a tremendous sense of isolation, being 3,000 miles from headquarters. Remember, this is long before the internet. We suffered from an overall lack of adult guidance. There were no elders other than Grady. We were all the same age. Some knew more than others, of course, and rose in the estimation of the community, but we were truly flying by the seat of our pants. The good side of this was that there was much experimentation. On the other hand, there were many mistakes and a great deal of chaos. Among the other causes of chaos was our rampant drug use. This created continual disruption in which much bad judgment resulted. Emotional hysteria, unbalanced perception, and extreme states of mind contrasted with some of the more positive effect of drugs, a lessening of the ego and an openness to alternate states of perception. But a heroin overdose took the life of my best friend, Richard Gurney, in 1989. He was past master of Tahuti Lodge, an ordained bishop, and one of the most talented magicians ever to pass through the gates of O.T.O. Brilliant, creative, erudite, passionate, and serious. His early death was the greatest loss to Thelema since the early death of Jack Parsons in the 1950s. Gurney's death almost single-handedly put an end to the widespread order drug abuse that had gone on since Crowley's day, amplified by the culture of the 1960s. There was also a lot of sexual activity within the lodge, and this was another two-edged sword. Intimacy, warmth, and magical power contrasted with jealousy, rage, and hurt feelings. Emotional issues often overshadowed magic. Yet there was an innocence and sense of experimentation that could only have taken place before the scourge of AIDS. The members of Tahuti Lodge were a true community, and I see that here with you guys. We had a great deal of contact with each other, both in and out of temple. We did private ritual together, had dinners, hired each other at our jobs or our businesses, visited and vacationed together, made love with each other, took drugs, studied in small and large groups, went to museums, concerts, and other cultural events together. But we were neither inbred nor suffering from an arrogant exclusivity. We liked each other. At the same time, there was a culture of exchange with the wider pagan community. The Magical Child Bookstore held wonderful Samhain parties where Herman Slater would get a permit and block off 19th Street between 5th and 6th Avenues, and people would play music and sing and dance and eat and drink. All the different magical groups would be there. Golden Dawn folks, O.T.O people, Santerians, Satanists, Wiccans, and independents. Weiser's bookstore held an annual Christmas party. Food and drink would be served, and readers would be invited to come and join and talk to each other and share our knowledge and perspective with one another. Our bookstores were community centers. The impersonal, disembodied phenomena of online ordering was nowhere to be seen on our horizon, nor were Facebook or other internet social groups. Everything was upfront and personal. This called for people to exercise tolerance to those of different traditions. We learned to avoid monolithic thinking. On the other hand, there was never any fuzziness about who we were. We were Thelemites. We were not Buddhists. We were not yogis. Buddhism is part of our menu of religious influence, as are yoga and Hinduism, Zen, Christianity, Judaism, Gnosticism, paganism, but Thelema is unique. And we as a lodge were acutely aware of our own spiritual identity. I remember a desperate quest of enlightenment among us. Despite the frequent socializing, We experienced a life and death feeling about the great work. We burned with a holy fire. We were magicians, doing the practices Crowley outlined in the back of Magic and Theory and Practice. How did one pursue this practice properly? What did this doctrine really mean? How does one advance along the path? There was also a sense that we were in a great spiritual war, which we were. The cosmic war between good and evil played out in our own lives and within the lodge. When the Pope died while Grady was in town, we felt as if Thelema was triumphing over the dark forces of the old eon. When the Vatican announced it no longer needed to cleanse the ground before building churches, we knew we were winning. Cleanliness is next to godliness and had better come first. Gurney's favorite lyrics at one point were from a song called Life During Wartime. This ain't no party. This ain't no disco. This ain't no fooling around. We perceived ourselves as soldiers in a mortal battle, and a number of us died along the way. I spend some time in the book describing a violent confrontation over the Blue Equinox Constitution. Disgruntled members attacked the lodge. We refused to back down. But I wound up purchasing and learning to use a 12-gauge shotgun against death threats that I perceived to have been legitimate. In my opinion, there is one overriding purpose for an O.T.O lodge. That is group ritual. Members are already assumed to be practicing their individual spiritual work. We don't need each other for that. TAHUTI Lodge performed a series of original rituals that were the seasonal rituals, eight times a year. It kept us busy for 4 years. We created a new ritual every 6 weeks, resulting in some 40 altogether. These helped to provide an organizing principle for the lodge. They were a repeatable opportunity and obligation. This was in addition to our weekly Gnostic Mass and our very hectic initiation schedule. As the New York Lodge, we were initiating for people coming in from all over the country and all over the world. But the seasonal rituals offered everyone the opportunity to step up to the plate. Lodge members were encouraged not only to write their own rituals, but be in charge of assembling cast, props, costumes, do the scheduling, create the temple layouts. It was a crash course in leadership and magical creativity. We insisted that each one of the rituals be based on the text of the holy books, so it is also an excellent training mechanism in the Class A literature for us. You can get a real sense of one of these rituals in some videos I've posted on inthecenterofthefire.com. We recorded the dress rehearsal for a 1980 Samhain ritual and a later interview with the cast discussing O.T.O. When you boil O.T.O down to its basics, the essence to me appears to be the friendships we form. One can make a great deal of progress working alone. A solitary worker can be inspired by the holy books, the book of the law, and be very well educated by following Crowley's curriculum, laid out in words. But human beings are social creatures. We need other people. As we seek to expand our sphere, our personal individual sphere, the first opportunity is offered by AA. The AA aspirant is spiritually plugged into a current. One is not only guided by a written curriculum, like you would be as a solitary worker, but you are monitored, tested, advised, and challenged by an instructor. Later, a student will be added to your circle. The next level of social interaction on the Thelemic path is offered by O.T.O. Here, instead of working alone as you would as a solitary worker with your books and curriculum, or knowing just your instructor and student as you would in AA, in O.T.O. it appears that you know everybody in the phone book. The magical system of O.T.O. serves as what I like to call a cauldron of character defects. There's nothing quite like the Order for providing the opportunity to make fools of ourselves and to be forgiven and to be granted the chance to correct our behavior. What we cannot be in the O.T.O. are those brittle little self-deluded internet wonders that litter the magical path with their narcissism. We learn to develop thick skins by surviving the personal assaults and challenges to which we are constantly exposed by our membership. O.T.O. forces us to develop a sense of humor, perhaps the most valuable spiritual skill of all. Laughter is life. If AA is Raja Yoga, O.T.O. is Karma Yoga. I want to pay a brief tribute to Grady McMurtry. I don't think anyone in this room ever met him. But you need to be aware of who he was and why he is so personally important to you personally. To me personally. Grady was the man who shook the hand of Aleister Crowley. He provided a sense of continuity, of tradition. His Grady stories were filled with anecdotes of Crowley. We just couldn't believe we were so close to the master. Grady was a rough and ready leader. God help you when he yelled at you, with a voice and tone cultivated in the battlefields of World War II and Korea. And if you were close to him and in a position of leadership, you got yelled at. At least I did. With his long white beard, he looked like God or an ancient biblical prophet. He was in constant travel throughout the world. The Grady trips were huge undertakings for us. He would fly into town. He'd have one girlfriend or another at various stops and periods, and we'd always have copious amounts of alcohol and the finest drugs we could accumulate for his visit. At least until he gave all that up and began to drink grape juice at the Gnostic Mass. Grady was a force of nature, and he brought the order through its darkest period. Without him, without Grady McMurtry, none of us would be here tonight. People ask about my thoughts of the future. I remember Helen Parsons Smith describing her vision of a golden domed temple on a hill where the order would one day be headquartered. The instant she spoke of it, I saw it. And I still do. A library, climate-controlled secure archives, magical temple, guest quarters, meditation grounds, artwork, a media center. It's not hard to imagine. Weekly performances of the Gnostic Mass open to the public, with scholars and magical teachers offering classes, seminars, and courses of instruction. Outlying centers, campuses, prophet houses spread throughout the world. But perhaps our greatest success would be not to need an O.T.O. When the message of liberty becomes ingrained in our species, when Liber Oz becomes the law of the land in every nation on earth, when Gnosis becomes universal, the experience of God within the flesh at once on earth before an hour has struck upon the bell. If O.T.O. can help create a world like that, perhaps we can just hang up our spurs, kick back, and relax. In the meantime, I believe it's important that we don't mistake quantity for quality, measuring our success by our numbers. While I'm very well aware that the law is for all, I'm especially aware that her servants are few and secret. I believe the work of the order is to vibrate the word of the eon in rituals, media, print, art, science, politics, and the marketplace. We are designed to be an elite. The idea of half the world carrying O.T.O. membership cards is one I find appalling. When all is said and done, for me, the O.T.O. is about fun. If you aren't enjoying yourself here, you are in the wrong place. We all know it's work, pain, struggle, challenge, that it's maddening and frustrating. But the more important reality of being an O.T.O. member is this: it's cool. If Betty Boop came up to me and crooned, "Want to be a member, want to be a member?" I'd have to say, yes, I do want to be a member. Yes, indeed. I love the O.T.O. I hope I have been worthy of my tenure thus far, and that I may prove of even greater service in years to come. Most especially, I hope that all of you may share in the joy that I have found here. Love is the law. Love under will. Do you want to turn that off?